Here we are. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being there, sticking until the fourth one. There's a decreasing, let's say, engagement with the series of webinars. So I really appreciate that you're probably all sticking from the previous days. I'm pretty sure that there's no one just new that it's getting on the fourth webinar for the first time. So you already know me. I have an experience of 25 years working with civil society, both with civil society organizations and with the European Commission in several countries. And if you want to link with me on LinkedIn, here is my let's say, webpage. And as Simon was saying, let's have some questions through questions and answers. And what we're going to go through today, I didn't want to detail it very much here. We're going to do a little recap from the previous session so that we understand the overall structure. And we're going to focus today on monitoring. And I have expressed that through a dashboard in a plane where the pilots and the co-pilots have all the different information that they need. So if you recall, on day one, we saw the overall structure of how calls for proposals and EU funding is organized, usually in two steps: concept notes and full applications. Concept notes are small 5-page documents where you explain your idea, and you basically have to justify your design, the overall logical structure, and the relevance, how your idea is actually helping solve a real problem. And for that, we made the distinction. Let me just turn on the pointer. We made a distinction between the process of having the logical framework approach implemented to actually go through different analysis phases, and what's the logical framework matrix, which is one document that is requested together at full application. And we saw that those are different completely, and it's necessary to actually undertake the analysis phase to understand your stakeholders, to understand your problem, to analyze your objectives, and decide what's the best way to actually go about that before getting into your planning phase and having your activity and scheduling and so on. We also saw about what project management is and how it needs to focus on impact, on change, and not so much on the management of only cost and time and scope, but it's much more wider. And we saw that TeamSquare, which is the project management methodology of the European Commission, is there for you to be used. On day two, we focused on the people dimension, and we discussed how important it is to get to know the people we're working with. So we had let's say, tools, your stakeholder matrix, where you list your stakeholders, you analyze them and see what are their characteristics and their needs and capacities, but also how they can support and influence your project. And we can actually analyze that, map it in different ways to see what sorts of interrelationships are drawn by those stakeholders, because it's very important that we know what are the dynamics in those stakeholders, so that we can actually design different strategies for engagement, for communication, for participation, because that's going to be very important for your final success, for your impact, and for your sustainability. And we also saw about the need to have clear governance models inside the project, so that we differentiate who is accountable, who's responsible, who provides support, who is more in a strategic planning role, and who's more in an operational performing role. So we saw all those elements of the people dimension. And last Friday, we entered into completing the logical framework approach process, explaining, well, the different tools, such as problem trees and objective trees, and how we use them to analyze reality, context, what happens with the different causality, what's first, what's causing what, and how we have to address problems at the root causes so that we actually stop the problem from happening. And all that analysis provides for a solid intervention logic, which is this causality, how the inputs that we put in are transformed into activities, and the activities generate the outputs, and the outputs, when they're used, are the result or outcomes, and that contribute to the overall objective or impact, and how that reflects in the different spheres of control, the sphere of direct control at inputs, activities, and outputs, and then the spheres of indirect influence, so that we have all those things in these diagrams. And with that, we can have our full application. But still, we have a gap here, which is how we do about setting up the things that we include here in terms of indicators and targets and so on. So that's what we're going to be doing basically today. Yeah. So to start with that, I'm going to ask you, you know, that I would like to have a dialogue today with you. So I would like you to type words that you associate with monitoring, and we're going to build up our definition of monitoring, also seeing how your perceptions are aligned with the official, let's say, definition. So control, progress, quality assurance, proof, okay, checking the progress, identify shortcomings, track, okay, progress, okay, excellent. That's very good. Let's have a couple of other answers, and we're going to close and we're going to continue. I have to admit, I'm a little bit surprised, because usually I have done this exercise in other contexts, and the central word that comes in the center bigger is the word indicators, because that's something that usually people have more in mind, but that's perfect. So we're gonna go, and this is what the OECD, the Organization for Economic and Development, definition, which is used by European Commission, says that monitoring is a continuing function that uses systematic collection of data on specified indicators that provide management and the main stakeholders of an ongoing intervention with indications of the success of progress and achievement of objectives and progress in the use of allocated funds. So basically, you nailed it with the use of progress there in the center, because that's how we're going to be focusing on our intervention. Now, I want to, so let's go a little bit deeper into that progress. Why monitoring? Why do we monitor? We have seen that it's in the definition, it's included that it's a management tool. And it should provide us with regular and systematic information at any given time relative to their indicators. So we need to be able to answer these questions. Where are we? Are we on track? Do we have problems? Are we exposed to risks? Do we need to take corrective measures to actually advance as we are planning? And all that should be done at any of the levels of our project, right? So I'm going to ask you the next question. In your organization, how often do you check, revise, and or update accounts in your project budget? And I'm giving you lots of options. Like we're talking about accounts, project budget, expenditure. So I'm giving you lots of options. Every day, once a week, every month, every quarter, that means every 3 months, every 6 months, once a year, at the end of the project, once in a while, when we're asked to, never, or even what budget. So what in your organizations, how do you do your project budget revision, your check for accounts? Okay. I'm glad to see that it's usually every day will be too much, obviously, even once a week. Once in a while, it happens to be here once a year. I'm just glad to see that no one is getting on the what budget or never. So we have lots of participation that is coming here, over 47% with every month. So around half of the organizations have the tendency or have the structure to check for money expenditure every month. That's usually what happens. Most of the organizations I have worked with and been involved with, they do it every month, if not every quarter. It's you can see reflected here. Oh, we have some what budget here. So usually it's every month. Half of the people have answered that. Thank you very much. So that's why money, budget expenditure is one of the dimensions that is here under cost, time and scope. It's one of these dimensions that is directly related to inputs. Everyone is concerned in the organization to be able to answer the where we are, how much have we spent so far? Have we overspent? Are there any savings that we can use for something else? Do we have problems? Do we have enough funds? Are we safe that we're going to be able to pay our payrolls and the activities? Are we exposed to risks? How is inflation doing? Do we need to take corrective measures? Do we need to save on something? Do we need to separate some funds so that we make sure that we arrive at the end? People, organizations are usually concerned with these questions as often as at least once a month or every quarter. And it's actually easy because the indicator is money spent, which is something that is very visible. It's related to inputs, and that's very visible. Now, next question is same. How often do you check, revise on, or update if you're on track to project success in your project? You have to define success, but how often? We have seen that you check your budget expenditure once a month, generally, but I would like to see how many people answer. And now the first ones is actually every month. Great. Once a week. There's lots of people answering once a week. They check if they're on track to project success. So that's a bit surprising for me because that's really not what I have observed in my experience. Most of the organizations will check project success either once every 6 months or once a year when they're requested for a reporting exercise. But it's great that you are doing it more often, and that's a really good exercise. We're gonna see what are the elements that we are using that. Okay, so okay, now it has changed. Every quarter has a little bit more, but in any case, the usual problem that many organizations encounter is that it's relatively easy to actually keep track and monitor cost and tasks performed, activities that have been undertaken, the time, how many months out of the overall duration of the project has spent. But it's not that easy to define project success, measure it, and see how they contribute to the levels of specific objectives and overall impact. It's usually very frequent that people have an emphasis on money spent and activities done and delivered outputs, how we're finalizing our outputs, and not so much on the results and the impact. So we're going to talk about indicators because that's a crucial element of monitoring. And an indicator, again, as the official definition, is a quantitative or qualitative factor or variable that provides a simple and reliable means to measure achievement, to reflect the changes connected to an intervention, or to help assess the performance of an actor. That's why, for example, we have a budget expenditure fits perfectly the definition. It's a quantitative, it's simple and reliable. It measures how much we have spent. It reflects the changes in the progress, and it can help assess the performance or adjust. So when do we have to define indicators? We need to define indicators, of course, at design, at the planning. It's something that we do when we have to finalize our logical frameworks. It's the last stage of building up our logical framework matrices, and it's part of the design. Once all the levels are defined, we go into detail and clarify and detail the intervention by choosing concrete indicators and targets in terms of value, timing, and goals. But we also may want to include or refine indicators during monitoring as a way to steer the intervention, to take corrective measures, to inform stakeholders, and we will be using them during evaluation. It's important that when we evaluate, when we actually check at the end how we have done, we want to be able to demonstrate results and show accountability to everyone, not only your donors, but also to your target groups and stakeholders. Say, hey, this was worth it. This is very well. We have achieved what we wanted to achieve. We have managed to transform reality to get into that level of change. So most of you may have already seen these, let's say, principles of how indicators should be constructed. And the principles are SMART. This is the acronym, and it stands for specific. The indicators need to be targeting a specific area for improvement. They have to be measurable, so we need to be able to quantify or at least suggest how there's a change or a movement in the indicator. It has to be achievable. Make sure that it can be reached. Let's not get into astronomical or very ambitious targets or indicators, because that's not feasible. They have to be realistic. They have to be something that we can measure and state that those results can realistically be achieved, and time-bound. When are those results going to be achieved? But this is the, let's say, classical principles how to build up. But the Commission also uses this RACER acronym, meaning that the indicators need to be relevant, closely linked to the objectives to be reached. They should not be over-ambitious, accepted. Everyone needs to know about them. The role of responsibilities for the indicator needs to be well-defined. Credible, unambiguous, and easy to interpret. Data sources should be trustworthy and consistent. And here's a key element. indicators need to be somehow easy. Data collection for those indicators needs to be possibly at a low cost and effort. So that it's I want to insist on this, because if you choose indicators that are very complex to extract, they rely on different processes to gather all data, it's going to be costly, and you may end up not using that information for practical terms. And robust. It has to be against manipulation. They have to be straightforward and statistically, analytically validated as reliable. If choosing the right set of indicators provide an added element of credibility and competitivity to your proposal. You need to provide data in your applications. It's something that when you show in your application that you are familiar with sources of data, that you choose a consistent set of indicators, that you are willing to actually put in place systems to check that change that you are you want to observe, that provides an element of a strong quality to your proposal. Now, the indicators need to have several elements. When you define and you insert them in your logical framework matrices, of course, you have to give a title or a name for the indicators, definition or description of the unit you're measuring, how the value is calculated. And of course, you will have to provide with a baseline. That's the reference value at the start of the intervention. Milestones or path, the different stages or expected measurements that you expect to achieve along the way. And the final targets, which signals how much change is expected in that direction, and the sources of verification, where the data will come from, how you will gather data, and how credible that data will be. So in terms of guidance, indicators may need to be disaggregated, and when you disaggregate, you make them more complicated. But of course, it's very important to have at least gender in terms of your target groups and final beneficiaries, so that you show that you know the people, gender difference, age, territorial levels, income, studies, all those elements need to be disaggregated. But it's important to think about what's the cost, who is going to be dealing with all that data, what the quality of that data, and how you're going to be collecting those data. Now, usually there's a difference in how we approach. Indicators are to be expressed in neutral terms. They're used to signal a change, but not the direction of the change. So the objective may be to decrease the number of gender-based violence, for example, cases. That you want to decrease the number of gender-based violence cases, but the indicator should be number of gender-based violence cases reported and not decreased. That's your orientation. That's your objective. That's where you want to go. So let's see another case, and I just wanted to show you an example of an indicator. The indicator also in terms of gender, percentage of women in senior positions of trade unions or public administrations in different positions. So the indication is the percentage of women, and it defines at least at the level of head of unit post. And you will have a baseline data for the year 2010, which is 15%. And your target is going to be in 10 years to increase 10%. So in 2020, you want to have at least 25%, and in the middle, it's expected that you will be at 20%. And the sources of information, that's going to be Department of Statistics or similar official sources of information for your reports. Now, I always explain the importance of baselines, and I like to explain it with a diagram, because baselines are usually it's just the figure, how you project that things are going to progress. Like we were seeing in the previous exam, that it was 15% and 20% and then 25%. But that's how you are going to plan that it should be. But the reality, and that's your green line, let's say how it evolves. But in reality, progress may go more like in a blue line. So depending on how often you measure, you will see that there's no straight line. But you need to regularly check that progress and compare it to the initial plan to actually assess the trend and the tendency and how much deviation there is, so that you take corrective action to actually be on target by this time. For example, if this was your expenditure, your budget, and you only measure it here at milestone, you're saying, okay, I haven't done bad. I mean, my expenditure or my progress is fine. But if right after the milestone, it starts to deviate and there's no perceived way to correct the action towards the green line, you need to be able to figure out when to take corrective action before the tendency takes you too far. So this is just to visualize how it works, to have some sort of monitoring visualization of the progress. And I wanted to provide you with sources of indicators. Capacity for Dev is part of the European Commission website, which is huge, of course. But I'm giving you here the QR code for that webpage, where you can actually find thousands of indicators related to the Sustainable Development Goals, to their own internal monitoring frameworks. So from there, you can actually see and check, and they actually provide also sources of information for different contexts. And this is actually a downloadable file. It will give you an Excel file with those 2,700 and some indicators that you can download, and you can search and see how they're organized. Now, in terms of monitoring data, the methods or how we do these, basically we have to ask. Okay, let me, yes. Yes, I'll give you the link to the resource page. In case you want to scan the QR code, this will take you directly to this webpage. I'm just replying to a question posed in the chat. But if you search for Capacity for Dev indicators, you will probably reach this page very soon. However, I will integrate all these links in the document that we will be uploading by the end of the month, together with all the recordings of the webinar, so that you will have some resources to go through online. Okay, so as I was saying, methods for collection, for monitoring data, basically we have to ask, And we can ask through very different ways. One is surveys and questionnaires that can be done face to face, but also online. Lately, you have Google Forms and SurveyMonkey to actually launch these type of fast questionnaires. But you should also try to get interviews with key informants, with leaders from your communities, even organize focus groups to discuss several topics. You get together 4 or 5 people that are involved, engaged with your project, and discuss how our progress things, identify key elements, risks, direct observation, and that was something that was part of our cloud group at the beginning. You can review document. You also have digital monitoring tools like Kobo Toolbox and Open Data Kit, which are specific apps that are designed to help civil society organizations, and not only civil society organizations, any organization, in the structuring of data gathering. Some of them even have, positioning through GPS, so that you actually know where this data has been collected. I haven't used them extensively. I know that they're very useful. I know people that have used them, but it's they're quite a resource for you to explore. And with all that, well, you will have, we have seen how to build up the result chains. We have also checked about your assumptions, and we will have here your indicators with the name and definition, the baseline data for your value and reference year, the target, and the updates that you will be filling in when you're reporting, and the source and mean of verification. Okay, so once you have all this process, you will have completed your whole logical framework matrix ready for submission and ready to be used as a monitoring tool for yourselves to actually do all those checks that you were mentioning that you will be doing every month or every quarter to actually see the evolution of those factors. I usually do not suggest that monitoring is done on such a high frequency unless you have very simple indicators and you have a very fast access to your data, because monitoring is something that is time consuming and it can be expensive. But you should definitely have a monitoring plan that is linked to that intervention logic, to that logical framework matrix that establishes all those indicators, so that what data do we need, when does the data need to be collected, the frequency, the methods, who will be collecting the data, project team, and from whom. And you have to be proportionate. You have to balance the effort and the use. Data that you gather but you do not use to make decisions, it's actually a little bit of a waste. I mean, you can include that in your reporting, but unless you're using it for something to steer your project, your decision making, you have to adjust and balance the effort and the usefulness. You need to try to cover all the project spheres, direct sphere, indirect sphere, and set it up as soon as possible in the full application or afterwards. But definitely you need to make provisions to integrate these activities for monitoring in your work plan, in your calendar, and in your budget, because it will take resources out of your team. So as a wrap up, and so that we have also some time for questions and answers, monitoring is an essential management function that provides you with information to steer, to make decisions. It needs to be adequately plan to cover also outcomes and impact, and not only inputs and activities and outputs. And for that, you need to choose carefully your indicators, raise your baseline data, where's your starting point, what's the realistic target that you're going to be achieving in the scope, in the time frame of your project, and include all those activities and methods, interviews, surveys, all those activities need to be integrated in your work plan and budget. And you can refer to official sources of indicators that are available. So that's it from my side. We still have like 45 minutes for questions and answers. And I really appreciate your attention. I'll just stop sharing here, and let's go with a round of questions. And maybe I went a little bit fast, but I hope I transmitted some messages there.
Thank you very much, Agustin. There was a question posted quite early on in your presentation, and I think you probably now answered it by your presentation. But Marta is asking, she says, reading some reports, I see that organizations are usually able to track project success in terms of whether they have done activities or not, but not focus on the results. And she asked how to ensure that the organization can define SMART indicators.
Well, in the case of the EU funding, those SMART indicators are usually a requirement during the proposal preparation. I will refer to the example that I think I gave on the I don't know if it was Friday or Monday last week, on the differences between the activities and the deliverables and the result. You may build up a road from one point to the other, and the project and the implementation of those activities and the deliverables of the road may be great, but if there's no traffic, or if there's a specific curve that hasn't been done properly, and there's still many accidents, or there's simply no traffic going through that road, then the project cannot be measured as a success. So we have to try to be looking at that dimension of change, and not only the aspect of the delivery. Ensuring organization how to ensure that organizations can define SMART indicators. Well, I'm hoping that webinars and information sessions like this one can provide a different mindset to actually go and look into different sources of indicators, because it's often difficult to think in terms of SMART, but if you have a list of available indicators, you can get inspiration from there.
And there's a question which I think is going back to some of the issues you've previously discussed in the other webinars, and that is the question is, could you provide a good example of theory of change, or maybe provide a brief guidance on how to approach a narrative theory of change? What are the main parts of it? What is the difference of theory of change with intervention logic? It's quite a big question.
I'm not an expert in theory of change, and I have read a little bit about it. I believe that theory of change is about identifying the overall connections between how reality works, and not so much in the linear way of a problem tree. So when you approach indicators, you actually develop the indicators to observe the changes in your theory of change. But I don't know exactly what are the parts of the theory of change that match the intervention logic. I believe that if you go through a theory of change, then you can extract an intervention logic and draft your logical framework and select your indicators for that section, fraction, or part of your theory of change, which covers a wider scope, let's say.
And the last question that we have at the moment is actually just referring back to what was asked earlier in the chat, and it's about making available that link, the resource link to about indicators that you mentioned, Augustine, from Capacity for Development web platform.
Yes, let me. Okay, I'm sharing my screen now, and this is the web page. So basically, is capacity. I will just copy paste here in the chat, and there's a question in the chat that should be in the questions and answers, so that we actually also, if you could, Arsene, if you could just copy paste that question into the questions and answers, because that also helps us keep track of the questions that we're answering, and we will systematize. But while you do that, or someone does that in the questions and answers, this is the link, the results and the indicators for development guidance. You can see here how you can filter and select sectors. You can download it here, and you have very different, let's say, results frameworks for monitoring and evaluation. You have the Sustainable Development Goals that, of course, have their own goals and targets and indicators. Gender Action Plan, Global Europe Results Framework. You have lots of information available on what the indicators look like or what can be used and so on.
Can you please answer the following questions? What would be your recommendation regarding synchronization of project indicators with OPSIS indicators? How do you budget for monitoring activities? And thirdly, what percentage do you budget for in the final evaluation of the project?
Okay, for the first one, I haven't had a chance to work a lot with OPSIS. I know that all civil society organizations need to encode their log frames in OPSIS, and that's a recent requirement. It's progressively taking on. You know, in some countries you may have some flexibility, but that's something that is going to take on. So my suggestion will be to make sure that what you upload into OPSIS is what you really want to monitor, and stick with that. And every time, and actually, I think that's one of the criticisms that I have heard about OPSIS. It's about how difficult it is for some organizations to actually manage that system. The logic of OPSIS is actually from the point of view of the European Commission to try to gather data that they can aggregate and make sure that their policies, their overall objectives are going somewhere. Well, I'm still looking for politicians and people talking about impact, and not only we have allocated 50 million, and you know, because usually at those levels it's measured still in money, but I think it's an important effort to try to harmonize monitoring exercises from all stakeholders. But I will recommend that you upload your data and stick and do the monitoring also through OPSIS and following those indicators. In terms of budget for monitoring activities, it will depend on your project, how intensive your data gathering will be. I mean, for those of you that answer that you're going to be doing it monthly, you will probably need one person dedicated to data gathering and analysis. So that's going to be one person every month doing all that. In terms of final evaluation, as someone was replying, it's usually 3-5% of the budget. Monitoring activities, going back to the budget for monitoring activities, I will recommend you have your 7% of indirect cost, but that's a separate thing. But you need to have at least, I don't know, 10-12% for all your management, or even 15% for all your management, including your monitoring activities. But it's certainly something that you need to plan for and budget for, because if not, in the end, you will not do it, and it's important.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for whoever also contributed partly of the answer there from the assistant. That was very
Yes,
nice.
thank you very much. And Simon, I give it back to you.